The music room at Northwood Academy was a temple of tradition, and its high priest was Mrs. Eleanor Vance. For 30 years, she presided over the annual Winter Showcase, a glittering event where the school's best and brightest performed for an audience of wealthy parents and donors. The air in her classroom always smelled of lemon-scented polish and old sheet music. In the back of the room, 12-year-old Elijah A.J. Johnson sat, his fingers tracing invisible scales on his worn-out jeans. His gaze was locked on the one thing in the room that felt alive to him, the majestic, ebony grand piano. To Mrs. Vance, it was a prized heirloom. To E.J., it was a spaceship, a time machine, a portal to a world far bigger than his small apartment on the east side. Remember, people, Mrs. Vance's crisp voice cut through the chatter, her eyes scanning her select group of piano students. The Winter Showcase is about excellence. It's about representing Northwood's legacy. I've posted the final performance list. No changes. A rush of students crowded the bulletin board. E.J. hung back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had practiced for this. For months, he cleaned Mr. Gable's auto shop after hours in exchange for using his old, out-of-tune upright. He'd taught himself, his ears and soul absorbing the music from YouTube videos of legends like Oscar Peterson and Errol Garner. He didn't just read music. He felt it. He waited for the crowd to thin before approaching the list. His eyes scanned the names. Penelope Ashworth, Sebastian Thorne, Charlotte Vanderbilt. His name wasn't there. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. Gathering every ounce of his courage, he walked up to Mrs. Vance's desk. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She looked up from her ledger, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Yes, Elijah? My name, it's not on the list. For the piano. I really want to play." Mrs. Vance let out a sigh that was heavy, with feigned regret. "Elijah, the piano roster's full. We have students who have been in formal training for years. The showcase isn't for beginners." "But I'm not a beginner," E.J. insisted, his passion overriding his nerves. "I can play. I've been practicing every day. I even composed something." A few of the other students snickered. Mrs. Vance's smile tightened. "Composed? That's ambitious." "But Elijah, this isn't a venue for experimentation. The pieces we perform are curated from the classical canon. They require a certain technical discipline. The kind you get from private lessons, not from," she trailed off, but the unspoken words hung in the air. "Not from whatever it is you do on your side of town." "Please," E.J. whispered, the word feeling like a plea. "Just let me play for you. 1 minute." "I don't have time for auditions," she said, closing her ledger with a definitive thud. "The decision is final. Perhaps you can join the stage crew. They always need strong hands to move sets." The dismissal was a physical blow. It wasn't just a no. It was an erasure. She hadn't even asked what he played. She saw his second-hand sneakers, his too small jacket, and the color of his skin, and she had made her decision. Excellence at Northwood had a very specific look, and he didn't fit it. He walked out of the room, the dream he'd nurtured so carefully shattering inside him. He didn't see his older sister, Maya, waiting for him by the lockers, her face already darkening with fury as she saw the defeat in his eyes. "What happened?" she asked, her voice low. "She said no," E.J. mumbled, staring at his feet. "Said the roster was full. Said I needed formal training." Maya, a college freshman who had fought her own battles at Northwood, saw right through it. Her jaw tightened. She said no because Penelope Ashworth's daddy donated a new science wing. She said no because you don't look like the kids in the brochures. Later that evening, in their tiny apartment filled with the smell of simmering stew, Maya watched E.J. push his food around his plate. The light in his eyes was gone. "You can't let her win, E.J., Maya said softly. "That piano in the auditorium, it belongs to everyone. It doesn't belong to her." E.J. just shook his head. "It's no use. She's the gatekeeper." Maya leaned forward, a new, determined glint in her eye. "Then we go around the gate. The showcase has an open floor segment at the end for surprise performances from the student body. It's a tradition. She can't stop you from getting up then." E.J. looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "You think?" "I know," Maya said, "but you have to be sure. You'll be doing it without her permission. There will be consequences." EJ thought of the piano, of the music that was a language more honest than any words Mrs. Vance had ever spoken. He thought of the feeling of the keys under his fingers, the only place where he ever felt completely free and completely powerful. "I'm sure," he said, his voice quiet but steady. The night of the winter showcase arrived. The auditorium was packed with Northwood's elite. Sequins glittered under the chandeliers. Mrs. Vance beamed from the front row, surrounded by congratulatory parents. One by one, her students performed perfectly executed, emotionally sterile renditions of Chopin and Beethoven. The applause was polite, predictable. As the final, scheduled performer took a bow, Mrs. Vance stood, ready to give her closing remarks and bask in the evening's success. But before she could reach the stage, a figure emerged from the wings. It was Elijah Johnson. He walked calmly toward the grand piano, ignoring the gasps and the confused murmurs that rippled through the audience. Mrs. Vance's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She took a frantic step forward, but Maya, sitting in the back, fixed her with a stare that could freeze fire. EJ sat on the polished bench. He looked small next to the massive instrument. The audience was silent, some curious, some already smirking. He closed his eyes, blocking out the world of Northwood, of Mrs. Vance, of all the people who had ever told him no. He placed his hands on the keys, and then he began to play. The final, resonant note from the grand piano didn't just fade. It seemed to hang in the air, a ghost of sound that held the entire auditorium captive. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full, crackling with the energy of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Then it broke. The applause started not as a polite patter, but as a thunderous wave. It wasn't the rehearsed, obligatory clapping from earlier. This was raw, emotional, and deafening. Parents, students, even a few stony-faced board members were on their feet. In the back, Maya wept openly, her hands pressed to her mouth, her heart swelling with a fierce, vindicated pride. But at the epicenter of the storm, EJ simply sat, his shoulders slightly slumped, the immense emotional expenditure of the performance leaving him drained. He opened his eyes, blinking as if waking from a dream, and saw the standing ovation. A slow, dazed smile touched his lips. The spell was broken by Mrs. Vance. She marched onto the stage, her face a mask of cold fury barely contained beneath a thin veneer of professionalism. She did not look at EJ. She positioned herself at the microphone, physically blocking him from the audience's view. "Thank you for that unexpected interlude," she said, her voice slicing through the applause, forcing it to die down. A reminder of the passionate energy of our student body. Now, if we can return to our scheduled... Wait! A man's voice, strong and authoritative, rang out from the front row. Mr. Albright, the silver-haired chairman of the school board, was walking toward the stage steps, ignoring Mrs. Vance's startled expression. He was a patron of the city's symphony and known for his impeccable taste. He bypassed Mrs. Vance completely and walked straight to piano. He extended a hand to EJ, who, after a moment's hesitation, shook it. "Young man," Mr. Albright said, his voice amplified by the microphone Mrs. Vance had abandoned. "That was extraordinary. Truly. What is your name?" "Elijah Johnson, sir," EJ said, his voice small in the large room. "Elijah Johnson," Mr. Albright repeated, turning to the audience. "I have attended this showcase for 15 years. I have never heard anything with that level of raw, untamed soul. That wasn't just notes on a page. That was a story." Mrs. Vance looked as if she'd been physically struck. Her carefully curated evening, her narrative of refined excellence, had been hijacked, and the ultimate authority had just sanctioned it. The following Monday, EJ was a minor celebrity. Students he'd never spoken to nodded to him in the hallways. A write-up in the school paper called the performance the most authentic moment of the winter showcase. For the first time, he felt visible. But in the music room, a Cold War had begun. Mrs. Vance never mentioned the incident. She simply pretended it never happened. When EJ walked in, Her eyes would slide over him as if he were a piece of furniture. The other students felt the chill. The ones who had snickered before now avoided him, their silence more telling than their laughter. The real battle began when sign-up sheets for the spring semester's Advanced Piano Mastery class were posted. It was a coveted invitation-only class taught by Mrs. Vance herself. It was also the only class that granted students unlimited key-card access to the practice rooms with the best pianos. EJ's name was not on the list. He went to the guidance counselor, Mr. Davies, a kind but perpetually overwhelmed man. "She says the class is full, Elijah," Mr. Davies said, shuffling papers on his desk. "And her discretion on student placement is largely absolute." "It's not fair," Maya argued when he told her that evening. "This is retaliation, pure and simple. She's cutting off your access to the instruments you need to grow." "I know," EJ sighed. "What can I do? Mr. Albright isn't going to intervene over a class roster. But the public might," Maya said, a familiar, determined glint in her eye. She pulled out her laptop. The school paper was a start. But what if your music reached a bigger audience? Unbeknownst to EJ, a freshman with a keen sense of drama had recorded his entire performance on their phone. The video was shaky and the audio slightly tinny, but the power of the music, the sight of the small black boy pouring his soul into the piano, and the subsequent shocking standing ovation were all there. Maya had gotten a copy. She spent the next week editing it. She added a simple title card at the beginning. He was told he wasn't good enough to play. Listen to what happened next. At the end, she added another card. Elijah E.J. Johnson, age 12, Northwood Academy student, denied a place in advanced piano. She posted on a local community forum, a few parenting groups, and on a whim, tagged a few local news stations and a popular music blog called Soulful Sounds. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then, on the third day, it exploded. The video was picked up by the music blog. The headline read, "A Prodigy Silenced? The System's Cost of Excellence." It went viral locally, then started to spread. The comments were a firestorm. Outrage at Mrs. Vance, admiration for EJ, and fierce debates about gatekeeping in the arts. A local news van pulled up to Northwood Academy. The principal, Dr. Evans, a man who prized order above all else, was suddenly thrust into a PR nightmare. He called an emergency meeting with Mrs. Vance and the school board. The board was divided. Mr. Albright saw a star to be nurtured. Others saw a troublesome disruption and a teacher being unfairly targeted. A compromise was reached, a political solution designed to make the problem go away. Dr. Evans announced that, given the exceptional circumstances, Elijah Johnson would be granted a special waiver to join the advanced piano mastery class. Mrs. Vance was instructed to accommodate him. The victory felt hollow to EJ. He had won his spot not through merit, but through public pressure, and he now had to walk into a classroom where the teacher despised him. The first day of the advanced class was tense. Mrs. Vance began by coldly outlining the semester's project, a formal analysis and performance of a complex classical sonata. It was a direct challenge to EJ's improvisational, jazz-rooted style. "Understanding the rules is the only way to truly master the instrument," she said, her eyes briefly landing on him. "There is no room for unstructured doodling." After class, as EJ was packing his bag, Mrs. Vance approached his desk. Her voice was low, meant only for him. "Let me be clear, Elijah," she said, her words sharp and precise. "You may have forced your way into this room through a viral spectacle and boardroom politics, but you do not belong here. Your little moment of fame is over." She leaned in slightly, her eyes cold. "I am going to make sure you fail. And when you do, everyone will see that I was right about you all along." Walking into the advanced piano mastery class felt like entering a gladiator's arena. The air was thick with a silent, judgmental tension. The other 6 students, all veterans of Mrs. Vance's private tutelage, watched Elijah with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. He took a seat at the back, feeling every eye on him. Mrs. Vance began without preamble. "True mastery," she declared, "is built on discipline, not drama. It is found in the precise execution of the masters, not in the chaotic noise of the untrained. She assigned each student a movement from Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. To Elijah, she assigned the third movement, a relentless, technically demanding rondo known for its intricate fingerwork and strict tempo. "It requires a metronomic precision you likely lack, Mr. Johnson," she said, handing him the sheet music. "But it will be an excellent lesson in discipline. Your performance, in 6 weeks, will be graded on your adherence to the score. Every note, every dynamic, every rest. There will be no improvisation." The sheet music looked like a foreign language of complex hieroglyphics. This was a structured, classical world he had no experience with. At home that evening, the notes swam before his eyes. He tried to play them on the small keyboard Maya had saved up to buy him, but it sounded stiff, lifeless, and wrong. "This is impossible," he groaned, slumping over the keys. "She's setting me up to fail." "No," Maya said, sitting beside him. "She's setting you a challenge, and you've never backed down from one. You don't have to become them. EJ. You just have to learn their language so you can speak your truth even louder." Maya, using her waitressing tips, managed to hire a retired music professor, Mr. Henderson, a kind-eyed black man with a deep love for all music, classical and jazz. Beethoven had fire. Elijah, Mr. Henderson said during their first lesson, he wasn't just about rules. He was about breaking them with purpose. Let's find that fire inside these notes. The weeks that followed were a grueling double life. By day, he endured Mrs. Vance's class, where her critique was a public flogging. "Your phrasing is pedestrian, Mr. Johnson. Your touch is brutish." Again, from the top. "And this time, try to play the notes that are actually written." The other students would smirk, their confidence bolstered by her favoritism. By night, and in secret sessions with Mr. Henderson, he deconstructed the sonata. He learned the theory, the why behind the notes. Mr. Henderson showed him how the left-hand patterns had rhythmic similarities to jazz walking bass lines, and how he could use subtle rubato, the art of stealing time, to breathe soul into the piece without breaking its structure. EJ started to find a bridge between his world and theirs. He began to hear the soul within the sonata. Meanwhile, the public spotlight intensified. The local news story had garnered attention, and a prominent national cultural magazine, The American Voice, sent a reporter to do a feature on the young pianist challenging the gates of musical elitism. The reporter, a sharp woman named Anya Sharma, interviewed EJ and Maya, but also requested an interview with Mrs. Vance and a chance to observe the advanced class. The day of the observation, the classroom was a powder keg of performative perfection. Mrs. Vance was unervingly pleasant, her criticism of the other students gentle and constructive. When it was EJ's turn to play a segment of the Pathetique, he took a deep breath. He played it with a technical accuracy that surprised even him, but he also infused it with profound, aching sadness in the slower sections that wasn't on the page, but was entirely within the spirit of the music. He finished. The room was quiet. Even the other students looked impressed. Mrs. Vance's smile was brittle. "Adequate progress, Elijah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've managed to tame some of the wildness. Though, I noticed you took some liberties with the tempo in the second phrase. A purist would call that an error." Anya Sharma watched the exchange, her eyes missing nothing. After class, as the reporter was packing her things, Mrs. Vance approached her. "A word, Miss Sharma," she said, her voice low and confidential. "It's important you have the full context. This narrative of the misunderstood prodigy is quite misleading." Anya listened, her recorder discreetly on. "I have Elijah's midterm grades here," Mrs. Vance said, showing a tablet. "He's failing, dreadfully. He is simply not academically prepared for the rigors of this program. All this media attention is putting immense pressure on a child who is, frankly, in over his head. His viral moment was a fluke, a piece of simple, catchy music. Real, high art music is beyond his capabilities." She leaned closer, her tone shifting to one of feigned concern. "And between us, the family situation is volatile. The sister is quite aggressive. I fear this is less about the music and more about using the school and my reputation as a stepping stone for their own ambitions. Anya Sharma thanked her for her time, her face unreadable. The next day, E.J. was called to the principal's office. Dr. Evans sat behind his desk, Mrs. Vance standing beside him with a look of pious concern. Elijah, Dr. Evans began, steepling his fingers. We're all very invested in your success. However, Mrs. Vance has shown me your current standing in her class. It's not sustainable. The board is concerned that the media attention is creating a hostile environment and that this advanced class is causing you undue stress. What are you saying? E.J. asked, his heart sinking. I'm saying that perhaps it would be best for everyone if you withdrew from the advanced piano class voluntarily. Dr. Vance said smoothly, we can find a more suitable elective for you. It would spare you the embarrassment of a public failing grade. It was a trap. Withdraw. And they could claim he couldn't handle the work. Stay, and she would fail him, proving her point. He was cornered. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Maya walked in, her face like a thundercloud, holding her phone. I just got off the phone with Anya Sharma from the American Voice, she said, her voice shaking with rage. She played me a recording of a very interesting conversation. Something about volatile family situations and aggressive sisters, and a student being in over his head. Mrs. Vance's face went white. So, let me be clear, Maya continued, turning to Dr. Evans. If you force my brother out of that class, or if he receives a failing grade that even smells of being unfair, this entire conversation, along with E.J.'s story, will be the cover feature of a national magazine. We're not backing down. The standoff was absolute. But as Maya let a shaken E.J. from the office, her phone buzzed. It was Mr. Henderson, their tutor. His voice was strained. Elijah, Maya, I just received a cease and desist letter from the school's legal counsel. They claim that by tutoring a student in for credit class, I am interfering with the pedagogical process and violating Mrs. Vance's intellectual property. They've barred me from teaching you anymore. The cease and desist letter was a masterstroke. It wasn't just about removing Mr. Henderson. It was about isolating Elijah completely. The message was clear. Asterisk, you are alone in this. The institution is too big for you. Asterisk. Back in their apartment, the silence was heavy. The sheet music for the pathetique. Sonata lay on the keyboard like an indictment. I'll fight this, Maya said, her voice tight with fury. This is intimidation. It won't matter, E.J. whispered, staring at the pages. The performance is in 3 weeks. It's over. The fire that had burned in him since his first defiant performance seemed to have been extinguished. It is not over, a new voice said from the doorway. Mr. Henderson stood there, a gentle smile on his face. He held up his hands. I'm not here as a tutor. I'm here as a friend bringing a gift. He placed a small, high-quality digital audio recorder on the table. They can stop my words, but they can't stop his. He nodded toward E.J. Before I got the letter, I recorded myself playing the entire sonata with detailed commentary on the technique and emotion. It's all there. The rest, Elijah, is up to you. It was a spark he needed. The next 3 weeks became a monastic ritual of obsession. E.J. lived inside the music. He woke up with a sonata in his head, fell asleep with the melodies threading through his dreams. He used Mr. Henderson's recordings as his guide, pausing, rewinding, and practicing each phrase until his fingers ached. He didn't just learn the notes. He absorbed them, internalizing the struggle and triumph that Beethoven had composed 2 centuries earlier. He started to hear his own story in the music. The struggle against an immovable force, the cry for recognition, the defiant hope. He practiced in the school's music room during his lunch hour, under Mrs. Vance's icy glare. He no longer cared. He was no longer playing for her approval. He was playing for his own survival. The day of the final performance arrived. It was to be held in the music room, judged solely by Mrs. Vance, with the rest of the class as the audience. The air was thick with anticipation and schadenfreude. One by one, the other students performed their movements with sterile perfection. They were flawless, note-perfect, and utterly soulless. Mrs. Vance nodded her approval after each one, bestowing thin smiles. Then it was Elijah's turn. He walked to the grand piano, the same instrument that had been both his gateway and his battleground. He didn't look at Mrs. Vance. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and placed his hands on the keys. He began, and from the very first note, it was different. It wasn't just Elijah Johnson playing Beethoven. It was a conversation. He played the technically demanding rondo with a stunning clarity, but he also played it with a raw, pulsing heart. He leaned into the dissonances, making them ache. He allowed the lyrical passages to sing with a vulnerability that made the other students shift uncomfortably in their seats. He wasn't just executing the sonata, he was testifying it. He finished. The final chord hung in the silent room, vibrating with the sheer emotional force he had unleashed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Penelope Ashworth, the top student in the class, began to clap, slowly, deliberately. One by one, the other students joined in. It wasn't a thunderous ovation in the auditorium, but it was something more powerful. Respect earned from his most skeptical peers. E.J. opened his eyes and finally looked at Mrs. Vance. Her face was a stone mask. She made a note on her clipboard. "Thank you, Elijah," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You may return to your seat." The rest of the class passed in a blur. As the bell rang, Mrs. Vance stood. "Your grades of final performance, and thus your final grade for the class, will be emailed to you by the end of the day." E.J. walked out, feeling strangely light. He had done it. He had left everything he had on those keys. Whatever happened now, he knew his own truth. At home that evening, he and Maya huddled around his laptop, refreshing his email inbox obsessively. "It's here," Maya said, her voice tense. E.J. clicked it open. Subject: Advanced Piano Mastery, Final Grade. Dear Elijah, your final performance grade, F. While you displayed a certain emotional interpretation, your technical execution was riddled with errors, most notably a consistent and deliberate disregard for prescribed tempo rubato, which constitute a fundamental failure to meet the core requirement of this course. Precise adherence to the score. Your final grade for the class is F. Sincerely, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The word burned into his soul. F. Failure. She had done it. She had taken his greatest moment and weaponized it against him. Maya was already on her phone, her fingers flying. "I'm forwarding this to Anya Sharma, to the school board, to everyone. She can't do this." But E.J. wasn't listening. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. He had given music everything, and the gatekeeper had slammed the door shut. He felt something break inside him. He stood up, walked to the keyboard, and closed the cover over the keys with a quiet, final click. "I'm done, Maya," he said, his voice hollow. "No more." Just then, Maya's phone rang. She answered, her expression shifting from fury to shock. She put on speaker. "Elijah? Maya? It's Anya Sharma. I just saw the grade. Don't say a word to anyone. I'm publishing my feature on the American Voice website at midnight, but that's not why I'm calling. I did some deeper digging into Mrs. Vance's past." She took a breath. 30 years ago, a young, brilliant black pianist named Corinne Davis was a star of the state's music competition. She was a heavy favorite to win a life-changing scholarship. The judge who oversaw the final round, the one who gave Corinne a failing score for excessive theatricality that cost her the prize, was a young, ambitious music teacher named Eleanor Vance. The revelation hung in the air, monstrous and undeniable. "This wasn't just about you, Elijah," Anya said, her voice grim. "This is a pattern, a legacy of silencing black excellence. The article lays it all out. But there's more. I found Corinne Davis. She's a revered music professor now. And when I told her your story, she agreed to talk. She's flying in tomorrow." Maya looked at E.J., whose eyes were wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. "She wants to meet you, Elijah," Anya said. "She said she's been waiting 30 years for someone to finally stand up to the woman who broke her. She said to tell you, the finale isn't over yet." The news of the F grade leaked online minutes before Anya Sharma's article. "The Gatekeeper's Price, a 30-year war on black genius," went live. The two events created a firestorm. Northwood Academy's social media channels were flooded. The school board's phone lines jammed. By morning, the story was national news. Dr. Evans's office was in chaos. He had the school board, represented by a grim Mr. Albright, on one line and a furious Maya Johnson on the other. Mrs. Vance was summoned, her face pale but set in defiant lines. "You have to change the grade, Eleanor," Dr. Evans pleaded, mopping his brow. "This is a PR disaster." "I will not," she stated, her voice trembling only slightly. "I graded him based on the rubric. He failed to meet the objective standards. This is about academic integrity. It's about racism, Eleanor." Mr. Albright's voice barked from the speakerphone. "And it's about a pattern. This Corinne Davis. Her testimony is devastating. The ravings of a bitter woman I beat fair and square decades ago." Mrs. Vance sniffed. The emergency school board meeting was scheduled for that afternoon in the library. It was decided it would be public, a desperate attempt at transparency. The room was packed with students, parents, and a thicket of news cameras. E.J. sat between Maya and Mr. Henderson, feeling like he was in a dream. He hadn't touched the piano since closing the cover on his keyboard. The joy had been leached out of it. Dr. Evans called the meeting to order. He gave a rambling speech about supporting all students while upholding standards. Mrs. Vance was given the floor. "I have dedicated my life to this school and to musical excellence," she began, her voice gaining strength. "I will not apologize for holding a student to the same high standards I hold everyone. This is not about race. It is about discipline. It is about respecting the canon." She was poised, practiced, and for a moment, it seemed she might weather the storm. Then the library doors opened. Anya Sharma walked in, followed by a tall, regal black woman with silver streaks in her hair and eyes that held a lifetime of wisdom and pain. It was Dr. Corinne Davis. A murmur swept the room. Mrs. Vance's speech faltered, her eyes widening in genuine shock. With the board's permission, Anya said, her voice clear, "Dr. Corinne Davis, currently the head of the music department at Wellington Conservatory, would like to speak." Mr. Albright nodded, his face grave. Dr. Davis took the microphone. She didn't look at Mrs. Vance. She looked at Elijah. "Young man," she said, her voice rich and melodic, "I heard your recording. What she calls errors, I call artistry. What she called a lack of discipline, I call the very soul of music." She finally turned her gaze to Mrs. Vance, and it was like a physical force. "Eleanor Vance told me the same thing 30 years ago. She told me my playing was too emotional, too theatrical. She took my dream and broke it in front of me. But unlike you, Elijah, I had no big sister, no viral video. I had to rebuild my dream brick by brick in a world that kept telling me I didn't belong." She turned back to the board. "This is not about one grade. This is about a systemic sickness. Eleanor Vance doesn't just dislike jazz or improvisation. She is afraid of it. She is afraid of any music she cannot control, any voice that speaks a truth she cannot understand. And she has used her position for decades to ensure those voices are never heard." Mrs. Vance was visibly shaking. "Lies! This is a coordinated character assassination." "Then explain this, Eleanor," Dr. Davis said, holding up a faded program. "The program from that competition. You gave me the only failing score. The other 4 judges gave me near-perfect marks. Your comment, which I have never forgotten, was that I lacked a refined touch for true classical mastery." She paused, letting the silence gather. "The same words you used in your email to fail Elijah Johnson." The connection was undeniable. A gasp rippled through the room. The board went into a frantic, hushed discussion. The outcome was inevitable. Mr. Albright stood. "The board has reached a decision. Effective immediately. Mrs. Eleanor Vance is placed on administrative leave, pending a full review of her conduct over her entire tenure. Furthermore, the grade for Elijah Johnson is hereby voided. He will receive a pass of class, and his official transcript will note his successful completion of the advanced piano curriculum." It was over. They had won. The room erupted. Maya hugged E.J. tightly, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Henderson was beaming, but as the applause began to die down, EJ stood up. The room quieted, every eye on the small, determined boy. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The room fell into a stunned silence. "A pass?" EJ continued, looking directly at the board. "You voided the F, but you're just giving me a pity grade. You're still not listening." He turned to the grand piano that had been wheeled into the library for a planned student performance later. "Mrs. Vance said I failed because I didn't play Beethoven's notes. But I did. I played every single one. I just played them with the feeling he put there." He walked to the piano and sat down, the cameras focused on him. "You want to know my final exam?" he said to the room, to the board, to the world. "This is it." He didn't play Beethoven. He began to play his own composition, the one he'd been working on in secret. It started with the haunting, struggling themes of the Pathetique, but then it exploded, transforming into a soaring, triumphant fusion of jazz, gospel, and classical. It was the sound of struggle, the cry of pain, the memory of Corinne Davis's stolen youth, the fury of Maya's fight, and the defiant, unkillable joy of his own spirit. It was a history, a protest, and a celebration, all woven together with a virtuosity that left the room breathless. When the last, glorious chord faded, the silence was absolute. Then, Chairman Albright, a man who had loved music his whole life, slowly began to clap. Soon, the entire room, students, parents, board members, even security guards, was on its feet, roaring its approval. The sound was cathartic, a tidal wave of acknowledgement. Through the tears and the cheers, EJ saw Mrs. Vance. She was still standing at the front of the room, utterly alone. The applause wasn't for her. It was a repudiation of everything she stood for. Her legacy, her life's work, had crumbled to dust in the face of a truth more powerful than her prejudice. She turned and walked out of the library, a ghost in her own life. EJ felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Dr. Corinne Davis. "You didn't just pass the class, Elijah," she said, her own eyes shining. "You graduated. And I have a full scholarship to the Wellington Conservatory Summer Intensive with your name on it. If you want it, we've been waiting for a voice like yours." EJ looked at the piano, then at his sister, and finally back at Dr. Davis. The joy was back, brighter and stronger than ever. "I do," he said, a real, true smile finally breaking through. "I really do. If you have stayed with us to this point, then subscribe and share to join our fight for a just world. Stay tuned for what's next. The end.